Good morning and welcome. Thank you for attending this month's Read, Listen, Watch, RLW on Roofers Coffee Shop. My name is Heidi Ellsworth and I am the owner of Roofers Coffee Shop and so excited to have you all here today watching this webinar. I have to tell you, this webinar today is going to be so important, not just for your overall roofing company, but for your sales team. And there may be a few of you out there that are like, ventilation, sales teams, how does this work? Well, the experts at Quarrix are going to share that with us today. And it is, I have to tell you, I've had a sneak peek and it's really interesting and it's going to be very important. But before we get started, I always like to go through our making sure we have our housekeeping in order. So this is being recorded and it will be on demand under the Read, Listen, Watch section of Roofers Coffee Shop later on today. If you have any questions, we are going to have some Q&A time at the end of this webinar. So please put those into the chat box or the question box. Megan Ellsworth is in the background and she'll be chatting with you and getting those questions in line. So please ask questions as we go along. I am very, very proud to introduce today Nick Nobbe. Nick Nobbe is a project manager or product specialist managing the ventilation with Quarrix. So as we're looking at ventilation, no more, sell more, selling beyond the shingles, Nick is really the key to this. He has been working on this with focus groups, with surveys, really starting to understand what's important to homeowners and what's important overall. So Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Heidi, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are so excited to have you. Just again, so everyone knows, Nick Nobbe has been working at Quarrix building products for over 5 years, and he is the senior product manager with a huge focus on growing ventilation and helping roofing contractors, homeowners, everyone to have safer and stronger buildings because of using the right ventilation in the right area. So Nick, I am really excited to get going and hear what you've been doing because you've really been looking at this for a while and doing a lot of great research. Can you kind of tell us about that survey that you did with Quarrix and what were some of the results that you found?
Yeah, so we were just really curious and interested to know from the homeowner's perspective, like what do they know about ventilation? And, what are the questions that they have? And particularly, we were really interested to know the people who had just been through the process or were actually in the midst of going through the process too. So we didn't want to just people maybe who were 10 years out from a roofing project. So what we did was we set up a series of focus groups in several markets across the United States. And myself and someone from our marketing team, we actually hosted focus groups and then we administered surveys too. And these were people who had either gone through a roofing repair or a replacement within the last 6 months prior or were going through one at that moment. So these were people who were in the midst of it, going through the process, and so this was it was great information that we got because they were like literally going through it. So there were a lot of really interesting things that came out of it, and I would say one of the biggest summary points was that homeowners don't know a whole lot about roofing, and it probably doesn't come as too much of a surprise to especially contractors who are selling it day in day out, but some specifics around that. A quarter of homeowners couldn't even tell us what type of roof covering they had, whether it was shingles or metal or wood shakes. They couldn't even name the type of material on their roof. 75% of homeowners could not name the brand of shingles that was on their roof. And about 60% of homeowners did not know the type of ventilation on their roof, whether it was a ridge vent or static vents or mechanical ventilation. They didn't know. So really we just found that homeowners didn't know a whole lot about what was on their roof. And then the other big takeaway too was that when we asked these homeowners, why did you pick the contractor that you did, and what were the important factors, and we did this both through surveys and in the focus groups, the overarching theme that came out was it was not just because of price. Price was actually almost never chosen as the #1 factor. It always came down to knowledge. And that really was, they wanted to make sure that they had a contractor who knew the products, knew the installation techniques and the science behind roofing, and what and also some of the details around like warranties and things. So the more knowledgeable the contractor was, the more likely the homeowners were to choose them. And that really played out in every single market. And again, price was never the top choice or reasoning for any of these homeowners.
So often contractors get into this price war, or they're thinking they have to, which you're showing through research, surveys, focus groups, that they don't have to show how knowledgeable they are and the quality of a great system that's going to fit the house or fit the building.
Yeah, for sure. And again, we had a lot of data from people who had already gone through the process, and they told us how many bids they got, and they told us, did we pick the low, middle, or high bids? And so we have the data to show that rarely did homeowners ever pick the lowest bid. And it came down to kind of that trust and comfort with the contractor, and that trust and comfort was built through just being knowledgeable and having an understanding of, okay, here's what's actually happening in my roof, and here's why this contractor is recommending these products. And so it comes down to knowledge of your products, knowledge of roofing, knowledge of ventilation, and that built that trust, and that ended up being the reason why so many homeowners chose the contractors that they did.
And when you think about it, across the country, there are some places that, due to weather, are replacing roofs, yearly sometimes, unfortunately for them. But in a good part of the country, you may only do 1 or 2, 3 roofs in your lifetime where you're actually buying them. And so that trust is so important. And a lot of the homeowners, what they're seeing is they are meeting the sales team. So they correlate that trust with that salesperson. So having a really well-trained sales team is so important. And so I'd like you to kind of talk about that. Like, why is it so important that, of course, the roofing company overall, but also the sales team understand ventilation?
Yeah, I mean, they're really the touch point between you and your customer. Like, as the company and the customer, those homeowners are going to evaluate your roofing company based on the interaction with that salesperson. So if that salesperson gets a question about ventilation that they can't answer, then that homeowner is going to assume that they're going to apply that knowledge level to the entire company. Even if your installers are really knowledgeable on ventilation or any other part of the process, they don't trust you as much. So it's important to have your sales team trained. It's important to have your installers trained. Everyone from top to bottom who might ever interact with a customer, it's important. And then it also, it speaks to then making sure that the product is done right from top to bottom, and ultimately that's going to help you as a roofer, as a contracting company to put on better roofs. You're going to have better educated homeowners, but happier customers, and it just helps you position yourself a little bit better against your competitors who may have that knowledge, but they don't know how to convey it to homeowners. So that's why it's critical to have your people up front have that knowledge.
And getting them trained in that whole process and really understanding it, I think that makes such a big difference. And one of the things that I know you do with contractors all over is you really talk to them about attic and roof inspections and how important that is in building that trust with homeowners. So maybe you can talk a little bit about why it's important and what they should be looking for around ventilation.
Yeah, no, and this is a great thing to build into your process, really, because it's important because you want to identify potential ventilation issues, obviously, and it's important to know what issues and problems you're going to have to solve just from like a technical and installation standpoint. So obviously, you want to make sure the job is done right, and that way, then you aren't having any reputational harm just because you have failures down the road. But also, it's important to do those inspections just because then you might be identifying opportunities to upsell a homeowner and provide additional value during the project. So like one common example is you can do that inspection and sit down with that homeowner and say, I see that you have 6 static vents on your roof right now. Well, I can come back and replace those 6 static vents, or I'll give you this other option too, and I'll upgrade you to ridge vent, and you're going to get more ventilation. It's going to be a more imbalanced system between the intake and the exhaust. So you can identify during those inspections, you can identify some opportunities to say, you know what, here are some ways we can improve what you have today. And ultimately, you know, so you want to be looking for things like making sure that they have enough intake, because again, you might be pitching an upgraded intake system. If they have blocked intake from inside the attic with insulation covering those vents, you might be proposing that, you know, I'll install attic baffles that hold the insulation away and ensure that this ventilation system works. And you can also be identifying any of those I would say issues that could potentially cause this roof to fail earlier than it should. And ultimately, again, it's opportunities for you to provide more value and to give those homeowners some different options and upgrades that, especially when they see it in an inspection report, they'll understand, okay, this is an issue and I would like to solve it. And it's more valuable to me to actually spend the money to solve those problems right now.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's really important too, because I love how on your last slide you had, you know, no callbacks or less, you know, you don't want nobody out there in the roofing with the roofing business wants callbacks. And so by really treating the inspection like you're talking about here as also that educational opportunity. I know that a big problem is the blocked intake vents. And
Yeah.
so if you aren't educating the homeowners, they may do something after the roof is done to kind of mess up the ventilation. So how do you, that's something you talk about a lot, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, because again, a lot of times, like you are only there for a set period of time while during the project, and again, homeowners love to come through, and yeah, they'll do different things. They might paint the outside of their house and paint right over those soffit vents, or they might say, you know what, our house is kind of leaky, and I want to put in some more insulation in the attic. And they come in, and that even if they do it themselves, or if they you know, if they have someone else come in, they don't even know to check that or mention that. So it is important to know that. And at the end of the day, one of the findings too from our surveys was the top reason homeowners chose the contractor they did in their projects was because of knowledge. Usually number 2 was referrals from friends, family, and neighbors. And so if you have issues that come up, whether it's during the project or, you know, 6 months later, a year later, I can say with a lot of certainty that you're probably not going to get that referral because they had those issues. So it's important to know that that's something homeowners are factoring in. And if you have that reputational harm from not doing things right up front or not doing the inspections, then it's going to diminish the amount of referral business you get.
Exactly. And I think it's also, you know, the more you can educate them, the less later on they're going to blame the contractor, and it right goes to those referrals. So as you're looking through some of the common problems that you really should be not only training your sales team, your whole company about, but also how is your sales team now carrying that on and educating the homeowner? Maybe talk through some of those common problems.
Yeah, so I've covered the country, and I've done my fair share of attic inspections and been on a lot of roofs. And it's the same kind of handful of problems comes up in most scenarios. The first one being not having enough intake. You know, intake is such a critical part of any good ventilation system, and so not having it. And so these are the things, you know, when you do those inspections, or even when a salesperson's first going out, if you walk around that house, you can usually get a general sense for, you know, they only have the rectangular grate intake vents, and I only see about 10 of them all the way around the perimeter of this pretty big house that looks like a problem, you can usually identify things even before you ever even do any calculations or get into the attic. So making sure that, there's enough, and obviously you want to do the calculations, but identifying that up front. And if you, at least as a salesperson, can communicate that early in the process to a homeowner, then they start to have their expectations set of like, you know what, we're going to have to spend a little bit more money to upgrade this. And better yet, if you bring that up and then the next 3 contractors come in to bid that job, don't mention it, it makes you look a lot more knowledgeable and it makes them look a lot less trustworthy. So that's something. Having the insulation blocking the intake vents from the attic space is another really common one. Mixing different exhaust vent types on the roof is something I see a lot. So you might have a gable vent paired with a ridge vent, or you might have a turbine paired with some static vents. And what can happen then is you can have those vents interacting with each other and not and kind of excluding the intake vents, and then they start kind of one acts as intake for the other, and then you get all kinds of issues that arise from that. So things like that, venting bath fans into the attic, that's been the source of a lot of problems that I've seen over the years, and probably one of the worst practices that I unfortunately still happens today. So there's lots of different things that come up, but ultimately, if your team is kind of primed to look for these types of things, then again, you're identifying issues that not only can you solve, like make the homeowner's life easier and solve a problem for them, but again, if it's anything, if another contractor who's coming in and bidding that job doesn't catch those, then you are appearing more knowledgeable to that homeowner.
And, I think that's so critical, because if you, especially as you're trying to sell that project and you're saying, well, you need all new ventilation, but you haven't taken the time to point out why, that it's venting into the attic, or you have mixed types of vents, whatever that may be. So again, that education up front of what's happening right now, what is the best solution, really can help a salesperson differentiate their company and close the deal. And I think as you're looking at that, Nick, too, when you really start looking at how to do better, once you've identified it, now you can talk to them about what you're going to do to solve it. So this is it right here, how to do ventilation better.
Yeah, so I think the companies that do this really well, and the ones that from our focus groups we were finding were winning the jobs a lot more. It's the ones who kind of do all the things you need to do with this process. So really do the math up front, because ventilation comes down to some simple calculations, and there are resources online that we'll talk about towards the end of this to help with that. But generally, doing the math and making sure that, okay, here is what this attic space or this roof configuration requires by code, and then you can take that and show that homeowner, here is what is required by code, and here's what you have today, and actually you fell short in this, so here's how I recommend upgrading that. But at least doing that math, and so you have that basis to say, you know what, you have a functional ventilation system from both the math and the code perspective, but also just kind of from the inspection perspective. So doing that up front, that builds a lot of trust and credibility with the homeowner. Doing an attic inspection, you'd be surprised. I've talked to a lot of contractors and a lot of homeowners too, who prior to a roofing project did not inspect the attic, and you can identify a lot of issues there that could be solved. And again, those come in the form of upgrades then potentially to those homeowners too. So doing that attic inspection, I can't stress enough how critical that is. Checking both the intake and the exhaust too. I think I've gotten the sense over time that sometimes there's a feeling of, especially in a re-roofing project and not new construction, the roofer is like, hey, that's off the roof, that's not my role, that the siding guy put that on there, or that was installed, decades ago when the house was built. And so unless the homeowner tells me about like their issues there, that's not my problem. But I always tell contractors that if that roof fails, 7, 8 years down the road because of moisture problems, because you didn't have enough intake to support the exhaust, that is your problem. And whether it's fair or not, ultimately you are responsible for that roof and the performance of that ventilation system. So making sure you're addressing both intake and exhaust with every project, and not just going in and just replacing what vents are there, or like replacing the system as is. I mean, I see that happening a lot where it's like, here's what you have today. I will line item quote exactly what you have today, but take a step back and actually say, okay, this is what they have today, but what is the best actual system for them? And you can give them some options too. You don't need to go the whole 9 yards and present them with the 100% best perfect, because obviously cost is always a consideration, but there are ways where you can provide like good, better, best options and let that homeowner be the one to decide, what, we want to go all the way and make it the best system, or we just want to improve it some percentage over what it is today. So doing that, aiming for that balanced system. I mean, that's so critical with any good ventilation system, is that equal parts intake and exhaust. And I think really I would say one of the most missed opportunities and one of the more important parts about how to do ventilation better really is explain it to the homeowner then. So you're going to say, okay, here's all the, here's what's going on in your attic and your roof. Here's what the codes say. But then actually take that to them and say, here, I'm going to walk you through not only all my recommendations, what this is, but explain to them the why behind it and really what this is and how it works. So explain to them, okay, your attic ventilation system is 2 parts. It's intake. Fresh air comes in from the outside. It leaves out the exhaust vents at the top, via the stack effect and hot air rising. And, with when you have intake and exhaust points, you get air movement and air circulation. And so this is why it's important. One example I always tell homeowners or contractors to use with homeowners, I always say, explain to them, like, think about when they're in their house and they open up a window on one side of the room, and then they go and open up the window on the other side of the room, and you feel that air rush through. Like, that is ventilation in a nutshell. And so if you can like use an example like that, homeowners like, oh, okay, that's why it's important for me to have really good soffit vents, and that's why I should spend this money upgrading, because way more air moves when I have both intake and exhaust. So it's really translating and conveying that to homeowners. That is doing ventilation better. If they can kind of like parrot back to you, like, this is what ventilation is and how it works and why it's important, then you'll know that you and your team are doing a good job. And last is just giving homeowners options too. I alluded to that good, better, best model earlier. So again, you don't necessarily need to push them and say like, okay, you like have to do ridge vent or you have to do some like high-end mechanical ventilation system, but give them some options and say, you know what, here's what you have today. You're a little short on the exhaust side, and I think there can be some improvements. So you know what, I'll add a couple more static vents, and that'll be like the better version, or I'll give you the best version and we're going to upgrade you to a high profile ridge vent. And here's all the benefits of ridge vent. And then so then they have 3 different options, and they're going to compare those options. And what a lot of research over a lot of time, and including our focus groups, what we found is that homeowners don't want to pick the worst option. They don't want to have the worst choice for their roof. So giving them those options helps drive more sales and more margin ultimately for the contractor.
And I think too, I know some contractors out there might not right now be a little timid about getting into the attic due to COVID, but there's so many ways of doing that with, masking up and just communicating well with the homeowners and explaining to them how important it is to really get that view and get that look. And one of the other things that I think too, as you're talking about doing it better and giving them those 3 options, is really looking at what it's going to do for the life of the roof, and also for the for just the overall energy efficiency of the house. That your heat pump or whatever you may have in the attic, the house is nothing's going to have to work as hard with good ventilation. So sharing those kind of things outside of things for better options, I think helps also with homeowners.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm actually over the last 3 weeks, I've been looking at houses, and one of the first things I look at is the roof. And when you think about the cost of a roof and compares like to the big investment you're making in the house, I'm like, it's a huge selling point to me if that roof is less than 5 years old, and I'm like, either adding a lot more to my budget or taking off a lot if it's going to be done, because it's a huge investment to redo a roof. So if a homeowner knows that they're going to be putting on a healthy, long-lasting roof, it eases so much more of their worries, and they're a lot more likely to pay 3% more by putting a better ventilation system. Because when you factor in upgrading to ridge vent in the scope of a large roofing project, it's a pretty small percentage of the budget. And so again, especially when homeowners can think, you know what, I'm not going to have to worry about moisture issues or heat buildup in the attic and the issues, over the life of that roof. That makes them so much, I would say, more comforted, and they're like, you know what, I'm willing to spend that extra $3,000 to $5,000.
Right, to do it the right way. Now
Yeah,
I know both and owners have a lot of misconceptions about ventilation. And so as the salespeople are out there and as you're training, how can they address some of these misconceptions to make sure that the homeowners really have the best information to make those decisions?
Yeah, there are definitely some common misconceptions out there around ventilation, especially if you like as a homeowner, if you start going and reading on like blogs and things online. A lot of people who are not educated on the topic start kind of sharing their opinions. It's kind of like the whole WebMD phenomenon where people can diagnose their own problems and then they go see their doctor and they find out it's completely wrong. So a lot of misinformation out there. One of them that I see are a lot, and this one actually is in practice, like when you go out, is just more ventilation is better. I see a lot of times homeowners who just thought that, if I saw more vents on the roof, that is a better vented roof. And if I see like more ridge vent along all of the ridges, that means that one is better than the house next to it that doesn't have as much vents on it. And really, it's definitely not the truth at all. It's not about getting the most ventilation on a roof. It's about getting the right amount of ventilation. Because ultimately, if you have too much exhaust ventilation and there's not enough intake to support it, then you're going to have an imbalanced system that doesn't have those nice kind of air exchanges that happen, within the attic space, and you don't have that nice kind of convection effect. What ends up happening is it's so overloaded on one side of the system that it becomes a lot less effective. And in some cases, you actually can start to get a reverse effect where air is coming in because there's so much exhaust. So again, it comes down to doing the calculations and making sure you have the right amount of ventilation. Because one thing I also tell contractors too, I'm like, the more ventilation you put on the roof, the more holes there are cut in the roof, and the more like those are just more
Yeah.
chances for moisture to get in. So you want to get the right amount. Like obviously there's a degree to which you want to go in terms of getting the right amount of ventilation, but if you're going far past that, you're not really doing much to help that roof then. So getting the right amount versus the most is critical.
Nick, just real quick, let me ask too, because, I live up in the Pacific Northwest. And so I grew up working with contractors on ventilation and how important it is because it's so much moisture. But one of the things you've talked about too, and I'm kind of jumping on your next misconception, but is that ventilation isn't needed in every climate, but that's not true, right?
That is, you're right on that. It's like it's needed really everywhere. I think it's critical, and for I would say slightly different reasons in different places. So up in the Pacific Northwest, the relative humidity and the moisture in the air is so high. So it's about moisture, and so you want good ventilation systems to kind of keep things air moving and keep things dried as best they can, because you don't want moisture sitting for long periods of time in the air and in enclosed spaces. But if you go down to Arizona or Texas, where they get tons of sun throughout the year, that all that UV exposure and all the heat, that if you don't have an effective ventilation system, then those attics build up so much heat from beneath, and it basically becomes like a little oven that's baking your shingles from beneath. And that's when you start to see in those markets, you'll see the curling of the shingles on the corners of them, or you'll see them cracking. And that can happen way earlier than it should. So and then snow and ice damming up where I'm in Minneapolis. That's
Right.
a huge problem that we're trying to solve, is keep the snow out of your attic, keep the snow melting evenly across your roof, and actually try to get your attic ventilation systems to the point where when it snows in the winter, that attic is close to the outdoor temperature. So that way, when the snow lands on your roof, it doesn't melt, trickle down to the bottom, freeze, and then create the ice dams.
Yeah.
You want that roof nice and cold, that roof deck nice and cold, so that way then you don't have those ice dams building up. So we've all kind of got in different geographies, we have our different like challenges, but at the end of the day, ventilation is basically the conservative measure to kind of mitigate all those problems. So regardless of where you are, it's always a good idea to have a good ventilation system.
Yeah, that is really cool. And again, really understanding that it's not all about cost. It's about performance.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like I said, we consistently, homeowners told us they did not pick the lowest bid. They were actually like nervous about that,
Yeah.
and they didn't want the cheapest option. So just because you might think that homeowners are scrutinizing and it's always going to come down to the pennies, like if you can convey to them that you are providing the best solution for the long-term health of their roof, and that you are a trustworthy contractor who is going to stand by your work and is going to be there, not just for the next 3 months when you're leading up to the project and doing the project, but also 3 years after if they do have any questions. Like if they have that, they're more willing to spend money, and to spend money not only with you, but to also spend money then upgrading within that project too.
Exactly. So, okay, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's, we've got these misconceptions and you've talked about the whole ventilation. Then as your sales team is really going out there, incorporating ventilation in the process, in the sales process, over pretty much the whole experience of this new roof. Talk a little bit about the importance of that and how they can do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, making it part of the inspection process is critical. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that you have to like go out on a separate day or spend an hour doing a separate ventilation inspection. It's just, it should be a standard part of the inspection that you're doing prior to quoting that project. And then educate those homeowners too. Just again, explain to them. I think the process always works best if you kind of first explain to them, here's what a good ventilation system is, equal parts intake and exhaust. The codes require you to have 1 square foot of ventilation for every 300 square feet of your attic space. Just kind of give them the high level points of what it is and why it's important, and then walk them through the results of your inspection and say, okay, here is what we found. We told you about that 1 in 300 rule where you want 1 square foot of every 300 square feet of attic space. Well, you have 7 box vents on your roof right now, and based on our calculations, you are short. So now it's time to, here's our recommendations. And when it comes to the recommendations, I think really presenting homeowners with good, better, best options goes a long way, because it gives you a couple benefits. One is you're not locking yourself into one number that another contractor can come in then and just go $100 under, and then you lose the job. So you're giving the homeowner options. Two, I think you're building some trust then with the homeowner too, because you're not just forcing them into options. You're giving them options, and they feel like they have more control over the process. So we found that homeowners just felt a lot more comfortable when they could pick the different options. And the third benefit of doing those multiple option bids is that you're giving yourself an opportunity to upsell again, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of contractors just miss that opportunity. Because even, you again, like to my point of no homeowner wants to put the worst roof on, and so when they see three different choices, they're going to either go to the middle or the higher one, just depending on what their budget is. And I would say in most cases, now obviously some cases that doesn't always play out, but more often than not, homeowners want to go at least to that middle number, and that's again where you can gain a little extra margin by installing some more vents or upgrading to a ridge vent, or upgrading from organic asphalt underlayment to a synthetic underlayment. There are a lot of ways you can do it, but giving those good, better, best options, I think, helps go a long way in just winning those jobs and ultimately winning some more revenue and margin dollars. And ultimately, to train your team, again, salespeople, all the way to anyone who is going to interact with that homeowner. If everybody is more educated on the products that you're recommending, on how ventilation works, on just roofing in general, the more educated you are and the more that your team is comfortable talking to those homeowners about any technical questions they have, I can guarantee you it goes a long way in winning jobs with homeowners. Because again, I talked to enough homeowners through our focus groups where it was like if they felt like the salesperson couldn't answer a technical question, they just kind of wrote those companies off, or like
Yes.
they said, you know what, I don't trust them because they're not very knowledgeable. Even though the salesperson's not going to be up on that roof doing any installs, it's still they wanted that comfort. So those are some critical things to bake into the process that you have with the homeowner.
I really like too how you say train the team, because you want a consistent message all the way through, from the people who are answering the phones to the salespeople. If someone calls in with a question too, there's a lot of times, especially now, people are at home, they may come out and ask the crew, some questions about the ventilation. And if the crew is giving a different answer than the salespeople, then that can cause problems too in the experience and ultimately in the referrals. So I love that you talk about that. And when you're really looking at it, that ventilation knowledge does close more sales. So let's talk about that, because everyone wants to close more sales.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, like I kind of said at the top, like it was funny how little homeowners knew about ventilation, accessories, just roofing in general. Um, you know, all of them could pretty much tell, like most of them, I'd say, over this period of months that we were doing these focus groups and from the surveys, is they could tell us about that they had 2 or 3 different options of shingles. But when we asked them, did you have more options? They were like, no, we didn't choose between anything, like, underlayments, flashing, like, pipe flashings or vents. Like, they weren't given any other options, and they didn't even know that they had other options. So homeowners just didn't even know. So that's why, like, if they know that, what, there's more than just box fence, or like the whirlybirds, they're like, we didn't even know that there was other kinds. Like when we would show photos of homes with ridge vent, they had no idea what that even was. Or if we said, like, do you see the ridge vent, they're like, what is that, or what does that even mean? So if you can even just educate them on, like, here's what this is, or like, here's asphalt, or like organic underlayment, or like, tar paper, and here is synthetic underlayment. Here, why don't you hold these two in your hand and see how they feel, and how do you feel like this would hold up over 20 years?
Yeah.
If you educate them on the options that they have, they're a lot more likely to want to choose the better thing. So really educating them, that'll help you close more sales. And again, when we found time and time again, when they told us that they were shown more options and when they were given more information, they trusted that contractor more. They viewed that contractor as more knowledgeable, and they ended up choosing those contractors a lot more. So it really came down to information provided and knowledge that was really based on that, like, really drove the trust between them.
Yeah, and I just think, there's a lot of, as everyone knows, there's a lot of competition, and homeowners are being told all the time you should do more than one bid, two or three bids. And so if you are looking at a bid, like you said, that doesn't give them any options or even talk to them about the accessories, whereas another company and that salesperson really goes through it and respects them with that knowledge, it's such a differentiator for to make your roofing company stand out in the sales process.
Yeah, and one kind of funny anecdotal thing that came up like many times too, and I was actually kind of surprised at this is homeowners were when they got single bids, because you're right, we always asked how many bids did you get,
Hmm.
and the average was three, but many, I would say at least in a third of the cases they got more than that. But what they always said a lot when they saw single number bids, and not weren't given options is they always thought, you know what? I don't know if I necessarily trust that number, and why are they choosing the products that they are? Are they getting kickbacks from the shingle manufacturer? Or are they getting kickbacks from the dealer that they're buying it from? Like, I want to know what I want to be the one to drive a little bit more of like what gets put on. And so there was some kind of skepticism
Hmm.
around like I feel like I'm kind of being forced into this bid and like this package of products. Like, why did they choose this, certainty shingle over an Owens Corning, or why did they choose this vent over another manufacturer's vent? Like, they kind of like once they started to really like scrutinize the bids, they were actually kind of skeptical about that. But when they felt like when there was like multiple options in front of them, then they're like, okay, that makes like I at least have a little bit more control over it. So that trust was kind of alleviated, and like it built a little bit more of that too.
Yeah. And really taking the time to package that knowledge to really explain. I mean, I love that. Explain like why we believe in this roofing product because it does all these great things for you. And so being able to really package that and put that in the hands of your sales team and work with your manufacturers and your distributors to put all that together, I think is critical. So let's talk a little bit more about how do roofing contractors do this? How do they get the knowledge, the information, and to really package it in a way that will help to close more sales?
Yeah, so I think just having the right content a lot of times too is because you're not going to be able to sit down with a homeowner for 2 hours and walk them through all the nuanced details of every product that you're going to be putting on that roof and explaining to them, how shingles are built and structured and how they last over time and the features of this shingle over the next. And same with ventilation, like you don't have the time to do that. So having the right literature and website content is critical. As far as leave behind literature, homeowners love that. One of the things that we actually talked about with them was, would you, if we because Quarrix, we are a ventilation manufacturer and we make some other products too, is we said if we were to mail you guys some just like helpful ventilation information, would you read it or would you just throw it in the garbage? And the second question was, okay, if your contractor gave you this exact same piece of information, or brochure, would you read it? And the overarching sentiment was about 100% of the time, if it came from us, they're going to throw it away. But if their contractor left it behind after that meeting, they would definitely read it. So having the resources, and that can kind of help too with that explaining like explaining ventilation or explaining the difference between different types of shingles. Well, maybe it's like an architectural versus like a 3-tab. Like if you have those pieces of literature, like the homeowner, because they're spending so much money on this project, they're going to read that. And so I think that helps kind of convey a lot of the knowledge too, without the whole burden falling on that salesperson to explain every bit of that.
Right.
And
And
then
they're
website,
doing research ahead of time too. They are,
yeah,
the
that's
homeowners
where
are researching. Sorry, go
that's
ahead.
that's where website content and social media content becomes big, because homeowners more these days are, before you walk in that door, I can almost guarantee they at least tried to look you up on social media or on your website or on in the like yellowpages.com or like Angie's List or something like that. I would bet they've tried to search you and tried to get some reviews. So that's where like having this content on your website, again, it lends to that credibility. It shows that you're knowledgeable. If you post, like a blog post or something on maybe you have like wildlife infestation issues in your region. Some markets, have huge problem with squirrels chewing on lead pipe stacks. And so maybe
Right.
you do a blog post on that. Like, it shows that you like care about the details and that you want to like solve the problems that come up in your area. And if you have information about ventilation on your website, it shows that you are care about the details and you care about education and being knowledgeable. So having that on your website and any social media you might have is really critical.
Yeah, it really is. It is so important. And to be able to give them that chance to research, to be able to find the information, to be able to confirm it's by a third party, that the contractor believes in it, because again, that trust of the contractor is so important.
Yeah.
Um, so as you're kind of looking at this, training and help, how do contractors move forward, taking this information from your studies and then working with you and their manufacturers, shingle manufacturers, other folks on getting training and help?
Yeah, so a lot of the manufacturers for all the products that you're using and installing, in a lot of cases, they are hosting trainings and seminars. I know in the ventilation industry, there's a lot of that happening, and it might be just individual events hosted by those companies. It might be hosted through the building products distributors, or they might be taking place at trade shows. But there's a lot of educational opportunities, and especially now in this kind of digital virtual world we're living in, I know there's a lot of opportunity for even just distanced online trainings. So there's lots of resources out there for that. As far as in the ventilation side of things, you can definitely, there are calculators online that help make this process a lot easier of specifying ventilation and getting the numbers right. All you have to know is the square footage of the attic space, and you can go on, like on Quarrix.com, we have a ventilation calculator, and you just punch in the square footage of the attic space, and it'll tell you exactly how much intake you need, how much exhaust, and then it'll even tell you how much product to use, whether you're using a ridge vent or something else. So utilize the online resources. Leverage ventilation experts too. I always tell contractors, it's always good to have a go-to person for every project you have or every kind of specialty area, because ventilation especially, like, there are some very strange cases out there, and those are some of the funnest and the weirdest projects I get, but I like, those are the ones where contractors just call me up and they have me on speed dial and like, I've got a really weird scenario, and so have that resource. I guarantee they're out there. So if you talk to your like local, like the local manufacturers reps, they will be able to get you in touch with someone like myself who does this on a day in, day out basis. So find that go-to person and leverage them. And ultimately, I think the biggest one is just invest in your team's education. Like, spend the money to send your team to trainings, or spend the time to reach out to a ventilation company and say, hey, can we set up a training with my team? And I want to train the sales team, the customer service, or whoever it might be. Like, I want to get everyone trained up on ventilation and how to talk about it with homeowners. So if you invest that time, and it can be done at really low cost too, especially now in this virtual world, it's pretty easy to do. So that can help you, win more projects and ultimately have happier customers too.
Yeah, and what I loved, I mean, and I know this is about ventilation and ventilation selling, but what I really appreciated what you said earlier, and it kind of goes along with this training, is looking at all the different parts of the roof and really taking, if during the time for the salespeople to differentiate your company is taking the time to talk about all the different types of underlayments that are out there and what's going to work best with which products, all of those things that go together. Accessories, sometimes we get so caught up on the actual roofing products that you kind of forget about the things that make the system. And that system education to a homeowner or to your team can really make a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure. And again, homeowners a lot of times don't know anything beyond the shingles. They just they see the shingles. That's the thing that's right in front of them when they pull into their driveway at the beginning and end of every day. But they once they understand, well, there's underlayment behind or underneath there to protect the roof decking, and there are flashings all around, the high moisture spots, and there's a flashing over your pipe stacks to make sure, because that's the most common area where water leaks happen. And there's vents up there to keep all that hot air and all that moisture buildup from causing problems in your attic. So once they see that it's more of a system and less of a product, then they're going to be a lot more willing to make better decisions and potentially upgrade to some better products too through that process.
Yeah, and we see a lot of the manufacturers out there who do a great job explaining that system and putting that whole system together. So there's a lot of places where you can get that kind of information and help, especially, for more seasoned sales teams and more seasoned companies, they pretty much got this. But if you're starting out in roofing, or if you just haven't taken the time to do these kind of things, Nick is the type of person that can really bring that next level of quality into your program, your sales programs. So, Nick, this has been great. I love sales. So I love having how to incorporate all this, but we do have some questions. We have some really good questions that are coming through here. And so one of the first questions, really, we want to kind of go back to the survey and your focus groups that you did. And one of the questions was, if 90% of the roofs are not adequately ventilated, then why aren't we seeing more roof failures? And so I'm kind of thinking too, if you could explain how you gathered that information and that percentage, that would kind of help understand, that, not all the roofs are failing, but we're seeing this as a area for great improvement.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I've gotten that question a lot before. And if you ask a lot of the companies out there in the industry, this number kind of is the consistent number. So it's not just generated by us internally. But generally, yeah, you might be thinking, okay, so why aren't we seeing 93% of roofs failure? I think a lot of the issue is that it's not manifesting itself in the moment. So you don't necessarily, because issues sometimes take years to permeate down to the building, the inside of the building itself. So you might not necessarily see that molding and the water spots on the ceiling, but I can't tell you how many times in most of the cases actually where I see ventilation issues, the homeowner didn't even know about it until they had a really bad hailstorm or a leak happened. And then once you get up into that attic, you see, whoa, this decking is completely rotted out. So a lot of times the issue is there, and it might not necessarily cause that roof to fail, or it might not cause an issue to have the point where the homeowner has to call up a contractor. But what it is it's shortening the life of that roof. Now, in some cases, the a slightly imbalanced system, that's just gonna, it might take off a much smaller percentage of the life of the roof. But then there's broader issues too that will shorten the roof by about half of its potential life. So it's degrees of issues within that 93% of roofs aren't. That is kind of to the all the specifications. So it's degrees within that, but ultimately when those issues and when ventilation isn't done right, then you're just taking off years of that roof and the shingles life and the underlayment's life and everything else.
And really, for those who are doing service and maintenance residentially, which is really starting to take off, checking that attic and checking the ventilation and making sure things haven't gotten painted over or whatever it may have also is kind of part of that too, because sometimes it's not the contractor, it's later on the homeowner and what they've done afterwards. I mean, I'm guessing a lot of the time that's the case.
Yep.
Yeah.
Homeowner modifications are a big one, or again, the existing intake, which was already there. And when you re-roof a house, if you don't do any intake, a lot of times it's, you just might not even be up to code either. You might have 30% intake and 70% exhaust, and that is not vented properly, and that's not done to code. So a lot of times too, it's not even meeting the requirements of the codes.
Everything. We have another question. And this is from Joe Hoover. Thank you, Joe. I was wondering about the importance of insulation levels and how they will affect your ventilation system.
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, I always tell people ventilation and attic ventilation, it's a system and not just a product. So as part of that system, insulation is very critical. You need to have the right levels of insulation in your attic between the attic space and the conditioned living space, because if it's inadequate, then that's where you're getting more heat transfer from the conditioned living space and more moisture leakage through and into the attic, which is going to cause more problems. So, codes vary in terms of what R values you need to achieve by region. But generally, if you are meeting or exceeding those code requirements, your attic is going to, and your ventilation system is going to perform a lot better, and you have a lot less risk of problems than if you are under insulated.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect. I was just checking here to see. I think we have time for one more question. And let me just pull this up here. First they said, the question was, hello, and thanks to both of you for the very useful program. So thank you. And the question is, I am in Miami and we have the very strict hurricane code. Ridge ventilation is not used much, but I like it. Could you give some more advantages and talk on turbines and solar? Yep, that's the question,
Yeah.
turbines and solar.
Yeah, so Florida is a very unique market. They have a lot of very stringent code requirements there because of the hurricanes they see. There's actually some specific product testing done in the industry to if you then you have to test and pass that if you want to sell in Florida. So I can just speak from the experience that I've had with our products. We've tested our products to the Miami-Dade and Florida building codes to meet those requirements. And basically what they do is they put your vent through a class 2 hurricane, and you can only allow a very minimal amount of water to come into the vent over a period of about an hour and a half. So there are vents that do test and pass that. At Quarrix, we actually do have ridge vents that have that rating, and we actually, ours has a weather protective membrane. It's called our storm stop membrane, and it's the storm stop ridge vent, and it's designed for those areas, so that way you can keep the crazy hurricane force winds of water from getting into your attic. But more broadly, just about ridge vents in general, I mean, I think the benefits you're getting is you're venting at the highest point of the roof. So, box vents and, those other types of vents sometimes can't be installed right at the ridge, and hot air wants to travel and collect at the ridge. So it's important to vent at the highest point. You're venting continuously across the entire space of that roof versus just in areas wherever you install individual vents. And it's just better curb appeal too, because you're getting all that ventilation benefit, but you're kind of hiding it beneath the ridge caps, so it's not nearly as noticeable. As far as the questions about turbines and solar vents, so those are, I mean, the turbines, obviously like the whirly birds with those spinning mechanisms. The idea with those is you use less of them, and once the top turbine mechanism starts spinning, then the idea is that it pulls air out of the attic. But I can tell you from our focus groups is that homeowners do not like those at all. Sometimes you feel like that be the only choice, but from an aesthetic standpoint, a lot of times they squeak and they get rusty, and so sometimes if those turbine mechanisms stop spinning at any point during the life of the roof, then it just basically becomes a glorified static vent, and you usually don't have enough of them on a roof. So I tend to steer people away from those if possible. Solar vents, those can work, and those are fine. They're definitely a little bit more expensive, so you're definitely going to want to factor that into the budget. And usually you're going to need a couple of them because they usually have pretty weak fans in them, since they're solar powered. Hardwired vents, like they're very similar except they're just hardwired. Those generate a lot more air movement. and they pull air out. But solar vents, they can definitely, I think they're a good option. But again, it kind of usually stretches a lot of homeowners' budgets.
Everything. Well, thank you. Wow. Last question. How do people get a hold of you, Nick? How do they, when they're looking for that ventilation expert, how can they get more information and get a hold of you?
Yeah, first you can just go to quarrix.com, and there's a lot of information on there, just not only about some product solutions that might be a good fit, but also just resources in general, whether it's the ventilation calculator or other things. So check out us at quarrix.com, but also you can email me directly at nicknobbe@quarrix.com. That's NICKNOBBE at QUARRIX.com. And I believe this presentation will be made available, so my email is in there as well. But I love to be a go-to ventilation resource for a lot of people, and this is the fun part of my job, is just talking with contractors and solving ventilation problems. So anybody can definitely reach out directly to me via email.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. And I want to thank Mark Oakland and Gabrielle. Gabrielle, I can't see your last name right now, but thank you for your questions along with Joe. That just makes such a difference, and we so appreciate that. And Nick, thank you. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi.
So I want to thank all of you for attending. As always, as we talked about at the beginning, this is being recorded, and it will be on demand on Roofers Coffee Shop under the Read, Listen, Watch section. So be sure to share it with your other folks in your company, with other roofing professionals, or with some homeowners. You never know. This will give them all kinds of great information. Also, please be sure to look up Quarrix in our directory. So Quarrix and Nick's information is all under Roofers Coffee Shop directory, and great information, great articles, some video. You can really find a lot of answers in that section. We appreciate having Quarrix on here. They are a great partner with Roofers Coffee Shop. I would like to invite all of you to join us again at the end of April. In fact, April 28th, Georgia Pacific's going to be here, and I'm really excited about this. The experts at Georgia Pacific are going to be sharing another study that they've done on extending the longevity of flat, low slope roofs with cover boards. So the name of the program is The Proof is in the Roof. It's a great information that is going to be backed by some long-term couple-year studies that have gone on by Georgia Pacific. So please join us April 28th. And again, thank you, Nick, and thank you all for watching. Join us again the next time on our Read, Listen, Watch program. Have a great day.